Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust consumes, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also.
Good morning, and welcome to True Wealth. I'm Dave Basconi, and here in the studio with me is Louise Walkup. Louise is sitting in for Maria Smith today, and we thank you for your time. Good morning, Louise. How are you?
Good. It's nice to hear your voice again, Dave. It's been a while.
Yes, it has. Why don't you tell the folks a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get going here.
Okay, that sounds good. Well, if my voice sounds familiar to a few of you, excuse me, I used to be on this program in this time slot at 10:30 a.m. I stopped doing the radio program. It got pretty busy, but I said I'd love to substitute anytime somebody is out. So here I am. So I'm happy to be here, and I have a lot to say since I haven't been talking with all of you for the past month. I'm a widow and have 3 kids, and I enjoy my time. I'm in my 60s, so I'm Medicare age, and I don't have to go to work anymore. So life is pretty cool as we get older, and we're hoping to lay up some treasures in heaven. So that's what I'll say. And how are you this week, Dave?
I'm doing well. I cannot complain. The days are getting longer, and weather's getting a little warmer, so that's good for everybody, I think. And so we're looking forward to spring here. Louise, I have to ask, what do you think of our studio? As you know, it is brand new, as you can see. So what do you think?
It's pretty exciting. It's something I never expected, and it just seems all professional. It's a pleasure to see. Thank you for asking. What do you think of it?
Oh, it's the best. We have state-of-the-art equipment, and matter of fact, I'll tell you, I'll give you a tour after the show, and then we'll go down to the cafeteria and have some lunch. How's that sound?
Oh, that sounds really good. I'm getting hungry already and ready for it. Thank you, Dave.
Oh, you're welcome. What are we going to discuss today?
Well, I loved yesterday's parable on the Prodigal Son. That's one of my favorite all-time parables, and probably the best known. There's so many insights on that give us guidance as to how to live. So I would like to talk about that one a little bit. And then I was listening to your program last week. You were talking about Charles Rich, some of his quotes from Loneliness. And I do like the quotes in that chapter. And one of the chapters following that, I also love The Longings of the Human Heart. And I've been reading some good stuff this week. I can share some of that too. So there's all kinds of things I'd love to talk about. So
okay.
So whatever you prefer in whatever order is fine with me, Dave.
Okay. Well, I tell you what, I found an interesting message in yesterday's homily as well. So why don't you go ahead and share your thoughts, and then I'll tell you what I learned.
Okay, that sounds good. Okay, well, the Prodigal Son, as we all know, it's probably one of the greatest stories ever told, except for Jesus' story. And interestingly enough, the title is The Prodigal Son. However, maybe the title should be the Merciful Father, because it's really about the 2 sons, the Prodigal Son and the lukewarm Christian son. So it's interesting, and it's memorable, and it's I think it's so cool the way Jesus comes up with all these parables, and once you hear them, you can't forget him at all, and other things, I hear other stories or watch movies, you watch a movie and you're halfway through, oh, I saw this one before, but the Prodigal Son and all the parables are short, memorable, good learning tools for us, and stick with you for life, and they mean something to us if we're 5 years old or if we're 55 or more, and the meanings we get from them with age become deeper and more profound. And of course, I think we all like this story because it shows how God is always looking for us. It's not really us looking for God, but it's God looking for us. Even in the Garden of Eden, the very first question God asked of Adam and Eve is, where are you? That was his first question, and God has not stopped asking that question since Adam and Eve. So we must be conscious of where we are. So I always like that, but what I really like about this parable is what it teaches us about sin. And this parable clearly demonstrates that sin is what prevents us from loving God, from loving our neighbor, from being in the community that we're supposed to be in. And the only real fruit of sin is misery and loneliness. So sin is what divides us from everybody else. And then we can see this clearly in the parable and assume that the prodigal son was deeply rooted in his sins. We don't know this for sure because it's not a biography; it's just a paragraph. And it starts out by saying the son asked his father for an early inheritance, which is a really weird question, especially in those times, and you wonder why the father would bother giving it. But he asked for it, and that was very insulting to the father. So he got his inheritance, and, it wasn't stocks or bonds or CDs, but it was basically property. So he sold this. And selling this is another insult because he basically sold the promised land. So the father knew when the son was doing the selling and asking for the inheritance that he was leaving. He was turning away. He had no intentions on returning, which is really, really, really sad. So this sin is what isolated him from those that loved him, from his father, who represents God the Father, and from everybody else. So we learn about sin, and then the last comment I'll make for now, I don't want to monopolize this, and I can get back to it later, is the gravity of sin. We often self-justify, and self-justify is just a fancy word for sin. So we often sin. We self-justify. We say, this is inconsequential. Doesn't really mean anything. Nothing at all. But sin is horrible, and it's an offense against love. It's an offense against all that God wanted us to be. So at this time of year during Lent, we need to ask ourselves, why am I sinning? Why do I have these weaknesses? Why am I treating others with anger, with annoyance, lust, impatience, aggravation, etc.? Why am I walking away from them? Is it that I'm too deeply attached to the deeply rooted sin? And why do I like my sin? Why do I hold on to it? Why don't I just throw it away? Why do I love it so much? Why do I love it more than God? So we tell ourselves that, it's not such a bad flaw that I have. It doesn't really matter. Nobody will notice it. But Dr. Rhonda, whenever she heard something like this, Rhonda Chervin, used to quote von Hildebrand, who said that there is a chasm, there's an abyss between an ardent Catholic and a saint. So during Lent, when we think about ourselves and our attachments, we should ask ourselves, why am I attached to this? And is this what's preventing me from being a saint? and realize that there's just an abyss between the two. Just like, and think of ourselves as St. John Chrysostom's bird. The bird that whether he was tied with a really heavy chain or just a thin, fragile thread, he could not fly. He was not free. So this is our time. We still have just 3 weeks left in Lent. We still have a little bit of time to look at ourselves and see what we're attached to, and see how our sin is separating us and isolating us from the love of God and love of our neighbor. So that's the main thing I get out of the Prodigal Son, but there's so much more. So what, and we didn't get a homily yesterday because they were doing the bishop's appeal in our church, so we heard a recording about donate some money, so I was really disappointed not to hear a homily. So what did you hear in your church?
We got the appeal a couple of weeks back. So yesterday we did hear a homily, and it was very interesting. And I thought your insights were excellent, and in some ways parallel some of my own. But our priest said that perhaps that story should be in the gospel should be renamed from the prodigal son to the loving father. He was quoting someone, but I don't recall his name right now. But after thinking about it, that does put a different slant on things, at least for me. And this is where some of the things you were saying kind of struck me as well. If we make the father the main character instead of the rebellious son, then forgiveness and mercy are emphasized over living a decadent lifestyle. Then perhaps it's easier for us to understand a loving God that would welcome us home despite the fact that we have squandered our time, talent, and or treasure by not living what God has called us to do. The only thing that's necessary on our part is just to be repentant and ask for forgiveness, as the younger son did of his father. So, again, it's the different approach coming in from the love and mercy, taking that away from the parable, as opposed to, thinking it all in terms of the rebellion. So does that, I know you said you had a couple of other comments on that, but...
Yeah, I did on the same theme. It's interesting how we're focusing in on the same points, absolutely. And now is the age of mercy, too, so it's more relevant. And I think we can learn a lot by looking at God and how he's the representative father for all of us. He's teaching us how to love. He's our model. He doesn't write off his son and say, "Oh, you scumbag." Instead, he just never gives up on him. He keeps looking day after day, hour after hour from afar, hoping his son will come in the distance. And then one day he sees a figure that maybe looks like his son, and he keeps looking and looking with his eyesight probably not very good in his old age, and he realizes it's his son. So he just goes out and he hugs him, and he loves him, and he gives him his ring, which is an invitation back into the family. It's just a grand celebration, which is really what heaven is like. Every lost sheep, there's a huge celebration, a fatted calf. And in the spiritual world, if I give you a fatted calf, there's like a billion other fatted calves to feed you. The more love we give away, the more kindness we give away, the more joy, the more celebration. It doesn't mean that we have that much less. It kind of like multiplies. But in the physical world that we live in right now, if I have $100 and I give you half of it, I give you 50. I only have $50 left. It doesn't replenish itself. But in the spiritual world, the more you give away, the more you have, and then you have to give all of yourself away in order to possess God. So giving in the spiritual realm doesn't mean the same thing as giving in the material realm. And one thing I do like about the way the Father treats the Son is something that Actually, Maria and I are we meet like three Wednesday evenings a month. On 2 Wednesdays we do the Bible, and 1 Wednesday we do a book. And the book we select always has to do with self-improvement and how to treat others. And one thing we're deeply into is not being overly critical, not nagging, because nobody, myself included, probably myself more than anybody, I don't like to be nagged. I don't like to be told what to do 24/7. Maybe once in a while, yes, and if I want your advice, I'll ask you, but I don't want to be continually nagged. Do this, do that. There's a better way to do that. Why don't you try this, Louise? Why don't you bake this with that ingredient instead? Whatever. Nobody likes to be told what to do 24/7. Nobody likes to be nagged. We want to be treated with compassion and respect, and that's just so important. Kids, your relatives will not want to come visit you if all you do is criticize them and tell them, why don't you do this? Why don't you eat more? Why don't you eat less? Why don't you major in this, major in that? Try a different friend. They don't want to hear that. We just have to love them unconditionally for what they are, or it won't work. And this works in all kinds of relationships. One of my friends had gotten that advice from a priest a couple months ago who was having problems with her marriage. And she was told, of course, not to nag because her husband knew what he was doing, but he told her to pretend she was the one doing this evil. And how would you like to be treated? Would you want to be yelled at? How could you do this to me? Or would you want to be treated with compassion and with kindness? So she tried the compassion and the kindness route with constant prayer, and it worked very well for her. And she was surprised when her husband told her, like 3 weeks in, he says, boy, you've been so patient and kind with me. I really appreciate it, and I'm working on this problem. And then she was telling me if she hadn't heard that from the priest, she would have been ready to chop his head off. And it would have backfired for everybody. So we must remember patience and compassion with those God puts in our path. I always talk about kids because I have kids and I love my kids. But, if you don't have kids, if you have somebody close, whoever it is that God puts in your path, patience, compassion, unconditional love. We can't say to the prodigal son, when he gave the inheritance, if you take my money now, I don't want to ever see you again. I will hate you forever. You're out of my house. We can't say that. We need to love them unconditionally. We can't put limits on our love. We must be like the father in that parable. We must love unconditionally, with patience, with kindness. And then I've noticed as I grow older, I don't know if you've noticed this too, Dave, but as we grow older, and again, speaking of my kids, it's just really hard to get angry at them or at anybody that you really love. When they go on the wrong path, or even if we do something wrong, whenever somebody messes up, instead of having this deep anger at others and yelling and screaming and having a fit, I just have like this deep compassion, this deep sorrow. My heart hurts so much that it just wipes out all the anger. And I think this is the love that God has. You never see God running out of patience. He's always encouraging someone, do better, try harder. I love you, we can do it together. And that's the love we should have for our children and those around us. And when my husband was alive, he was like perfect in that. And we were married for like 35 years, and all those years I've never heard him yell, never heard him run out of patience. He was always calm and level-headed, and said what he had to say, but in a good way. So we have to emulate the Father in that way. Do you find yourself that way with your kids as they get older? If there's anything that goes wrong, instead of being angry, you're just heartbroken?
Yes, and I think it stems from the fact that my children are now parents, and I have grandchildren, and but I think the feeling sometimes comes from the fact that we have a more mature relationship. In other words, they're in their 30s, one's approaching 40. That's different than dealing with teenagers. A 16, 19-year-old doesn't quite see the world the way someone who's married with children sees it, even though they're your kids in both time frames. They are far more mature as parents, and they can understand things. We both understand things much closer than I think a parent and a teenager might. So that is true with me as well. The other thing that you said earlier about having $100 and giving 50 away, that only leaves you with 50. I sometimes think that if you're doing it for the right reason, that $100 you had in the beginning can become $200.
I like that. Yes, the wealth ties up to your program. Okay, I'll remember that, Dave. Yes, true wealth. Yes, that's true. That's a good point. Very good point. Yeah.
Money spent in a good spiritual way tends to be multiplied.
Yes.
But going back to the prodigal son, the story doesn't end with the younger son's return home. As you mentioned, his older brother became angry when he heard
we have to talk about him.
Yeah, and he learned why there was a celebration. But even then, the father showed understanding as he went out and he set things right with the older son. And I think we can all relate to both sons in our lives. We can be one or both. We can be the decadent at times, and we can be the one that we think got gypped a little bit. But more importantly, I think we need to appreciate a loving father as the true message from this parable. Again, God wants us all to come home. And this all started me thinking from that name change about, instead of the prodigal son, to become the loving father. And it's amazing how one little comment in a homily can get you started on a whole different path. And now that parable, every time I hear it, it will mean more to me. And I actually think that I'll have a better understanding of it as time goes on, because not only just does time help with things like that, but also talking to people like yourself, you come away with a deeper understanding. And it's one that I enjoyed listening to because I'm learning from it. It also reinforces my own thoughts. It's not just something, I heard that yesterday. What else is going on? It was meant to be.
Yeah, I've heard it for the past 50 years.
But sometimes all you need is that one little trigger to get things going, and then it just takes you to the next level.
Yeah, that's true. And then if we read the gospel, actually all the readings, but especially the gospel every day, the gospel is the living word. It's God speaking to us directly. So when we read it, it's not the same prodigal son that we heard like when we were in first grade or high school or in our 20s or 40s. God has something new to tell us every time we read it. So we should read the Gospels every day and ask ourselves, what's God trying to tell me? And I remember when I was first given this advice to read the Gospels every day, but not only the Gospels, but the epistles also, and try to put it all together and see what it's like. What message is there for you, and to bring it to mind and think about it before I go to Mass and assimilate it somehow. It seemed like such a project, and I did it, and it was like work. But after I started doing it and it became a habit, then all of a sudden I was really eager. It was like, what does God have to tell me today? I'm kind of like curious. I'm interested. I'm wondering what's in it for me. What are you trying to tell me, God? And it's more of a conversational thing. I just love looking into it. And what I find is as I read, we look at the brother that often been forgotten, like you said, the second half of the parable. We have to ask ourselves, how am I like the brother? Do I harbor any anger or resentment towards somebody else? Do I think I'm a little better than you? Am I self-righteous? Am I judging anybody? Am I condemning anybody? And whenever we judge or condemn, it's like we think we're better than somebody else. So no matter who we are, I have to wrap my thoughts up quickly. It's 5 of. So like no matter who we are, we need to look at ourselves and see that we need ongoing conversion. Of course, the prodigal son needed to convert, and when he got up to go back to his father, the word in the Bible that was originally used was the same "get up" as Jesus getting up, rising up at the crucifixion. So it was symbolic of a new start, new life. So we all need that, but we also need just a continual conversion, a continual reflection on ourselves, and we need to make sure that we are forgiving everybody. The lukewarm brother wasn't too cool about forgiving the prodigal son. So we need to ask ourselves, is there anybody I really don't forgive in my pride? And just look deeply into it. And once we forgive, once we leave everything at the foot of the church before we walk in, only then are we really ready, if we're all emptied out, for God to fill our hearts with His kindness, with His love, with His mercy. But we have to be dead to ourselves. We have to be empty for God to fill us. Because if we're not, there's just no room for God to come in. And I think sometimes that's why people go to church week after week, after day, and don't get as much out of it, because they don't leave their baggage outside. We need a complete clean out, a metanoia, a complete change. So do you have like closing comments on that? I guess we'll only be doing our prodigal son today, Dave, huh?
Well, I think that's a good thing, because it just shows the strength of any given parable. And but as you were speaking, I was thinking that one could take the viewpoint of the older son, the one that felt cheated, and
it's very logical. Yeah.
Yeah.
He was cheated. Yeah, he was cheated. Absolutely.
Well, at least in his own mind, he was cheated until his father came out and said, everything that I have is yours. And the father needed to calm him down and give him a different perspective. I think the older son thought that maybe he had lost something, when really he had not lost anything. He was just not thinking it through, or thinking it in the same terms as his father. And that's what happens to us. We think it in our terms, not in the way God would say, okay, come here, I need to coach you here a little bit. We just need to straighten your thinking out. And, by having a friend that's spiritually capable of talking to us in that way, what a valuable gift that is, because we come away from that conversation or that discussion brand new. We're going, instead of being miserable, we're joyful. And we've just, again, gone through another level, which is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. It is something to consider, though. Legally, the lukewarm son was correct, because the prodigal son took 50%, and he was expecting 50%. And then legally, the prodigal son had no right to ask for any more, and the same way that we have no right to really ask half of what we ask from God, but God gives us everything, not because we earned it, but out of love, out of His overwhelming love for us. He gives us. We don't earn it. We don't merit it. So, you had asked me to give you a little nudge when it's like 10:59. We've got 1 minute to go, Dave. So I better do that before I get fired here.
Okay. No, we're not going to fire you.
Okay.
Again, Louise, thank you for coming on today. We really appreciate it. That was excellent. And it
was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.
Oh, again, anytime. And the advice I keep giving, I'm going to stick with it. But you just have to remember two things. To pray, always say your prayers, and always keep the horse between you and the ground. So with that, let's close with the prayer. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen. And
Amen.
let's always remember that the two most important times in our lives are now and at the hour of our death. Amen. It's 11 o'clock, so I thank you, Dave. It was wonderful. I'll be listening in next week to hear what you and Maria have to say. Bye-bye.
Bye, Louise. Thank you again.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.